Hello everybody, my name is Happy and I'd like to welcome you all back to my History Reaction channel. Today we're taking a look at every US president's death explained in 21 minutes by Agent Flappy. As usual, I will have a link to the original content in the description down below. Please consider heading over and showing Agent Flappy some love and support if you like what you see here today. Alright, this is another viewer request. I had done a Agent Flappy president video a couple weeks back, and I got a request to go ahead and take a look at this one as well. So I decided, sure, why not? Let's do it. So let's see how each and every president died.
From eating raw cherries to contaminated water at the White House to getting assassinated in broad daylight.
Right?
This is how every U.S. president died and their final words. And spoiler, while some left an epic message, others talked about soup. But first, let's start at the beginning with
Let's start with a disclaimer here. In some cases, what people describe as final words often aren't. They're among the final words. And in some cases, they might even be purely apocryphal, but a lot of times what are attributed to people's final words are the final words that people want to remember, if that makes any sense. A lot of these final words often are followed by a little bit of muttering, mumbling, remembrance afterwards, but these are the words that we remember.
George Washington, our first president, who got a serious throat infection after riding his horse in cold,
killed by
snowy
a doctor's,
weather.
almost
He
certainly.
had epiglottitis, which is when that little flappy thing at the base of your tongue becomes inflamed. Today, that's an easy fix with antibiotics. But back then, doctors tried bloodletting, which is when they cut your arm and drain blood from your body. They thought it would somehow help, but it ended up making things way worse.
Remove the ill
It's
humors.
believed Washington lost 80 ounces of blood. That's like 6 Red Bulls. He told his doctor, "I die hard, but I'm not afraid to go." And as he struggled to breathe, his final words were, "'Tis well." But if you thought that was dramatic, this is the most insane coincidence in U.S. history, where John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, the second and third presidents, died on the exact same day. They started out as friends and revolutionary bros. Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, and Adams helped defend it.
Yes, he did.
Squad goals. But in the election of 1800, the two became political rivals. Then, after a decade of not speaking, Adams and Jefferson reconnected as pen pals and became besties again. However, on July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years after signing the Declaration of Independence,
that is an amazing coincidence. Absolutely.
The spookiest thing happened. Jefferson grew ill from diarrhea, pneumonia, and a kidney infection. And on the night before his death, he asked, "Is it the 4th?" When they told him not yet, he held on for one more day. And his final words were, "No, doctor, nothing more." Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Massachusetts, John Adams was a sickly 90-year-old man dealing with heart failure. Completely unaware that his bestie Jefferson died hours earlier, Adams said his famous last words, "Thomas Jefferson survives." It's kind of crazy that these two, who spent their whole lives being frenemies, ended up checking out on America's birthday. Kind of like our 4th president, James Madison, who almost completed the 4th of July trifecta. Because after dealing with congestive heart failure, the father of the U.S. Constitution was on his deathbed, and doctors were trying desperately to keep him alive until July 4th. But when offered more stimulants by his niece, Madison said, "Nothing more than a change of mind, my dear. I always talk better lying down." Which basically meant he was ready to go, and died on June 28th, 1836. I mean,
Monroe does complete the
trifecta, close to making
though.
it to the 4th. But you know who did make it? The 5th president, James Monroe, who became the 3rd one to die on Independence Day. He had heart troubles which worsened after contracting tuberculosis. But his final words were about how he missed his old friend James Madison. "I regret that I should leave this world without again beholding him." And while most presidents die on their deathbeds, some die on the floor of Congress. Like the 6th president, John Quincy Adams, who, after serving as president, didn't retire to play golf.
No, but he kept on going. He had a long political career after the presidency. In some ways, a much more notable career after the presidency.
Instead, went back to Congress as a representative.
Yep.
And while casting a no vote, he suffered a massive stroke, grabbing his desk and collapsing on the House floor. And after they carried him out, John Quincy Adams said, "This is the last of Earth. I am content." But some presidents have more peaceful endings, like Andrew Jackson, who is one of the most insane presidents in American history. He was a tough dude who fought in duels, survived the first ever presidential assassination attempt, and beat up his would-be killer with a cane. But despite all this, he didn't go down the way you might think. He got tuberculosis, had heart problems, and suffered from dropsy, which is when your body fills with too much water. Hydrate or dihydrate, am I right? And on his deathbed, surrounded by family, this tough guy turned into a softie, with his last words being, "Oh, do not cry, be good children, and we shall all meet in heaven." And then there's Martin Van Buren.
And you can't talk about Jackson's death without talking about his parrot. He had a pet parrot. That parrot had to be removed from Jackson's funeral because of all the vulgarity. I wonder where he learned it from.
Our 8th president, who struggled with asthma and heart problems. He died quietly at his fancy house called Lindenwald, with his last words being, "There is but one reliance," which was his way of expressing his trust in God. And while Van Buren lived a long 79 years, our next president holds the record for the shortest presidency because of this one dumb mistake. During his inauguration, William Henry Harrison gave an insanely long 2-hour speech in the freezing cold rain without even wearing a coat. And for over a century, we thought he caught pneumonia and died. However, recent studies suggest this probably wasn't the cause, because he didn't get sick until 3 weeks after the inauguration. Experts now believe he either died from typhoid fever or septic shock due to contaminated drinking water at the White House. That's insanely unlucky, because
there were a lot of deaths in the White House in that region from various contaminated water-related causes. It's quite possible that's what happened to him as well.
Harrison only lasted 31 days in office, which means his vice president, John Tyler, got a promotion. But this president didn't have the best record with the people. He was the only president whose death wasn't officially mourned by the country, because during the Civil War, John Tyler sided with the South. He was even elected to the Confederate Congress.
He was.
But before he should start the job, he started having dizzy spells and died of a stroke, with his last words being, "Perhaps it is best."
Yeah, perhaps it is. Yeah, not my favorite president specifically because he went on to serve the Confederacy. Not a good look for a president to join the rebellion.
Agreed, John. Then there was James Polk, who died far too young at 53 years old. And it's because 3 months after leaving office, he was on a tour of the South where he contracted cholera, a nasty disease that gives you explosive diarrhea. But despite the circumstances, he went out as a romantic, with his last words to his wife being, "I love you, Sarah. For all eternity, I love you."
Aww.
I'm not crying, you're crying. But for this next president, you might be laughing, because Zachary Taylor died from eating too many cherries and drinking too much milk. Or did he?
Or did he?
During a 4th of July celebration in the sweltering heat of DC, Zachary Taylor desperately needed to cool off. So he ran into the White House, ate a bowl of raw cherries, and drank several glasses of milk. The problem was, food safety was basically non-existent back then.
Oh yeah.
And Taylor came down with gastroenteritis and died 3 days later.
You know, I grew up right next to a cherry orchard. It belonged to my uncle at the time. So, as a kid, I used to go over there all the time, climb up in those trees and just pig out on cherries. And on more than one occasion, I got horribly sick because of it. The last time, I swore off cherries, and I don't think I've had a single cherry since. Oh, I probably had a couple. But any appetite I had for cherries died with that final bout of overeating cherry sickness. I remember it quite well. I was miserable. I don't know if it was related to the cherries or not, but I just remember I'd been sitting up in a tree, just sitting there, you know, on branches, just popping cherries. and miserable not long after.
However, many believe Zachary Taylor was poisoned because he was the current president when this went down, and pre-Civil War tensions were rising. But when forensic scientists looked at his body in the 90s, they found nothing fishy. So it really was just some bad cherries. And before he died, Taylor said, "I'm about to die. I expect the summons soon. I've tried to discharge my duties faithfully. I regret nothing."
All right.
And after death by cherries, VP Millard Fillmore stepped up to the plate. And unlike Taylor, Fillmore lived a long time after his presidency, until he had a stroke. But right before he died, someone gave him soup. And Fillmore said, "The nourishment is palatable," which basically means in fancy talk, it tastes good. 5 stars for the...
I wouldn't say that means it tastes good. It means it's edible. It probably, in my mind, means the opposite. Like, well, doesn't taste great, but I can eat it. I guess that counts.
the soup. But our next president had one of the saddest
Franklin
deaths
Pierce.
ever.
Oh, yeah. Franklin Pierce, not my favorite president. I think we talked about him in the previous Agent Flappy video, as one of the worst presidents in history, and he probably is. But to be fair to Franklin Pierce, he was extremely distracted as president. He suffered a lot of personal loss right before becoming president, and it affected him severely.
Just weeks before taking office, Franklin Pierce's son was killed in a horrific train accident. And this sent Pierce on a downward spiral of depression. He started drinking too much, became an alcoholic, and destroyed his liver with a disease called cirrhosis. He died after losing re-election, and nobody wrote down his last words because he was all alone.
Jeez.
Dang, that's sad. And unfortunately, the
Kinda
downward
is.
spiral of America continued with the next president, James Buchanan, who many view as one of the worst presidents because the Civil War was coming and he did nothing to stop it. Buchanan died of a bad respiratory infection, although some believe he fell victim to the mysterious National Hotel Disease outbreak. But that's just rumors. He went out proclaiming, "O Lord God Almighty, as God wilt." But you know what they say. Weak men create hard times, and hard times create strong men.
Right.
Which leads us to this tall drink of water with a top hat, Abraham Lincoln, one of the greatest presidents in American history.
Yep.
Although the Confederate South might disagree, because while watching
Definitely.
a play at Ford's Theater, Abraham Lincoln was shot in the head by John Wilkes Booth.
Yep.
And unfortunately, couldn't leave us with any words of wisdom. Instead, his final words were a casual reassurance to his wife in the theater box. She won't think anything about it. He was referring to what a friends might think of them holding hands at the theater. Scandalous. But after Lincoln's crazy assassination, VP Andrew Johnson took over, and he wasn't exactly popular.
No, another one of our worst presidents. Actually, other than Lincoln, the last 3 were all pretty bad.
Congress tried to kick him out of the office with impeachment. And years later,
To be fair to Johnson, that impeachment was absolutely a setup. It was absolutely political motivated. Should never have happened. They deliberately set up circumstances so that they had an excuse to impeach him. Doesn't mean he was a good guy. He really wasn't. But his impeachment was a sham.
Andrew Johnson died from 2 strokes he suffered while visiting his family in Tennessee. The second stroke left him paralyzed on one side, with his final words being, "My right side is paralyzed. I need no doctor. I can overcome my own troubles." And while some presidents were hated, others were celebrated as war heroes, like President Ulysses S.
Oh, he had a
Grant, who led
terrible
the Union
death.
forces to victory in the Civil War. But after his presidency, things took a turn for the worst, where Grant lost his life savings in a bad investment scam. Turns out some dude was running a Ponzi scheme. And to make matters worse, Grant was diagnosed with throat cancer. Probably from all the cigars he loved smoking. Sometimes 20 a day. Get this guy a nicotine patch. But before he died, Grant wanted to write his memoirs so his family wouldn't be broke after he passed. So he sat there every day writing as cancer ate away at his throat. And his last word was water. A simple request for a glass of water because his throat was so dang dry.
Yeah. Grant describes how this felt to him. Just taking a drink of anything was agony for him. But he was absolutely determined to finish those memoirs because he was destitute and he didn't want to leave his family in a bad position. Mark Twain, I'm pretty sure, yeah, it was Mark Twain promised to publish it and get the word out, provided Grant could finish it. So Grant worked day and night his last brief period of life, struggling with this painful throat cancer, barely able to eat and drink at all, just to try to provide for his family. The really moving story and the pain he was in while doing this is just, it had to be tremendous. I don't remember his exact words, but I've read his memoirs and I've read some of his letters. What he talks about is just horrifyingly bad. It's bad.
Crazy way to go out. But our 19th president, Rutherford B. Hayes, died like most of the others, at old age from heart failure. His emotional last words were, "I know that I'm going where Lucy is," referring to his wife, who passed away 4 years earlier. But things got even crazier with our 20th president, James Garfield.
Oh, yeah.
Who, after being in office for 100 days, was
Second
walking through a
assassination.
train station when a mentally unstable man stepped behind him and fired 2 shots.
Yep.
The first bullet grazed his arm. The second
They're just releasing a movie about that. It's coming out soon if it's not already out. I haven't been following it that closely, but I know that it's there.
bullet was lodged
I don't think
in his
it's out
back.
yet.
But Garfield didn't die because the bullet never
Yep.
hit any organs. All right.
He should have survived. His doctors murdered the man. They really did. Not intentionally, but we'll let him tell the story. But Garfield absolutely should have survived.
However, it all went downhill when doctors stepped in. They probed around with unsterilized instruments
Trying to
and
find
one
the bullet.
even punctured his liver. So, although Garfield initially survived, he suffered from massive infections over the next 80 days until he slowly died. With his last words being, "Swaim, can't you stop the pain?" Poor guy was basically the victim of medical malpractice. Man,
Big time.
I hate Mondays. Garfield was succeeded by Chester A. Arthur, who eventually suffered from Bright's disease, which is kidney failure, and died from a stroke at 57. No definitive last words were recorded, but some say he whispered, "Life is not worth living." That's a bummer. Because our next president was a dude living life to the fullest, Grover Cleveland, who was our 22nd and 24th president.
Right.
You go, Grover! He died from heart failure at 71, with his last words being, "I've tried so hard to do right." And the president caught between Cleveland's 2 terms was Benjamin Harrison, who
Right.
came down with a bad case of the flu, which progressed to pneumonia. And despite good medical care, his lungs failed, and his last words being, "Are there any doctors here? Doctor, my lungs." Poor guy couldn't breathe, but at least he wasn't one of the 4 U.S. presidents assassinated.
Joe
Like
McKinley.
William McKinley, who was attending a meet and greet in Buffalo when one of the people waiting in line was Leon Czolgosz, a Polish-American anarchist. He concealed a .32 caliber revolver under a handkerchief wrapped around his right hand. When it was his turn to meet the president, Leon
Yep.
fired 2 bullets into McKinley's
There just wasn't a lot of security at this time. It's been getting progressively better, but there still wasn't much there.
abdomen. Luckily, 1 bullet grazed him, but the other went deep into his stomach. So they rushed him to the hospital. But the problem was doctors couldn't locate the bullet. So 8 days after the doctors' attempted game of operation, gangrene set in and McKinley died, with his last words being spoken to his wife. "We're all going. We're all going. God's will be done, not ours." But after this, Americans were fed up with presidents being killed. So the Secret Service gained full-time
Right.
responsibility for protecting the president.
Yeah, so this is where you get full-time protection. Before that, you had sporadic protection. You might have a few people around, but nothing formalized.
Yeah, I think it's about time.
Yep.
Now, VP Teddy Roosevelt got promoted to the top job, and this guy was one of the toughest presidents we've ever seen.
Oh, yeah.
He served 2 full terms and wanted to come back for a 3rd. In 19...
To be fair, he the first term he was elected as vice president. President McKinley died. Theodore, he didn't like being called Teddy, so we'll call him Theodore, took the position. under the current system, he wouldn't have been eligible for that third term because if you serve more than half a year as VP, then that counts as a full term as president. Or excuse me, if you serve more than half a term as a result of ascending as a VP, then you don't get, that counts as a full term. So Teddy was our youngest president, but not the youngest man elected to the job.
In 2012, Teddy ran again as a third-party candidate for the Bull Moose Party, and when stepping out of his hotel to give a speech, he was shot in the chest. However, he didn't die.
Nope.
In fact, he got right back up and gave an 84-minute speech with a bullet lodged in his chest.
He absolutely
That's
did.
pretty wild. Teddy went on to live another 6 years.
Yeah, and he ends up telling the audience, I don't know if you know this, but I've been shot, but doesn't matter, here's my speech.
Where he led a deadly expedition through the Amazon rainforest.
Yep.
And once again, almost died. This time from a leg infection, weight loss, and malaria. And many believe this permanently weakened him.
Yeah, malaria can be chronic. It can keep coming back. Yeah, he's in bad shape. If he hadn't gone on that trip, he might still be alive.
Because at 60 years old, Teddy died from a blood clot in his sleep, with his last words being, "Put out the light, James." Man, pour one out for Teddy. Because while some presidents are warriors, others are William Howard Taft. The president famous for being so fat, he got stuck in his bathtub.
He
Charming.
did not.
But believe it or not, that's not how he died. At only 5'11", William Taft ballooned to over 300 pounds, which strained his heart. And although he lost a great deal of weight, the damage was already done, with Taft dying from heart failure at 72. And his final words weren't recorded, so we'll just have to use our imagination. Woodrow Wilson never fully recovered from a massive stroke he suffered while in office.
Right.
Unfortunately, he lived his final years partially paralyzed, with his last words being, "I am a broken piece of machinery. When the machine is broken, I am ready." But at least this dude died after being president. Unlike Warren G. Harding, who was dealing with corruption scandals while president. So in an effort to rebuild public trust, he went on a cross-country speaking tour. But the situation was so dang stressful, he developed pneumonia. And while resting in bed with his wife reading the paper, Harding died from a heart attack. Poor guy's last words were, "That's good. Go on, read some more." And his VP Calvin Coolidge became the next president, who after a few years of leaving office, died suddenly of a heart attack at age 60. Silent Cal was famously super quiet, so upon news of his death, Dorothy Parker joked, "How can they tell?" Cal's last words were, "Good morning, Robert," a simple greeting to a worker in his home. And while some presidents' lives are cut short, others live a long life, like Herbert Hoover.
Yeah,
who was
he
the second
did.
president to reach 90 since John Adams. Hoover eventually died of internal bleeding, but because he was so weak, no last words were ever documented. And then we have Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was elected president of the United States a ridiculous 4 times in a row. I mean, leave some for the rest of us. But by his 4th term, FDR's health was falling apart. He dealt with high blood pressure, heart disease, and secretly had polio, which left him paralyzed.
Secretly, not secretly, it was pretty well understood by just about everybody. But it was one of those things where he tried to hide it, and people pretended they didn't know. But it's not something you can hide. He couldn't walk. Couldn't even stand on his own, not really. I mean, he could if he had proper support and all that, but not something you're going to hide.
Eyes from the waist down. Oh, and on top of all that, he had to deal with the stress of the Great Depression and a small conflict called World War II. Pretty crazy. So in his 4th term, FDR suffered a massive stroke while posing for a portrait at his Georgia retreat. His last words were, "I have terrific pain in the back of my head." Which means VP Harry Truman became the next president, and he lived for several more decades until he was hospitalized at 88 years old from pneumonia. Truman's condition worsened as multiple organs failed and he slipped into a coma. And because he was in a coma, no last words were recorded when he died. On the other hand, we know the exact last words of Dwight D. Eisenhower, and they were pretty direct. After a long history of heart attacks and strokes, Eisenhower was hospitalized at the famous Walter Reed Hospital. He ultimately died from congestive heart failure, with his last words being, "I want to go. God take me." Sometimes presidents are ready to go, while
Yep.
others are taken far too soon.
Oh, yeah,
President John F.
JFK.
Kennedy, who was famously riding in an open motorcade in Dealey Plaza when a sniper's bullet struck his head, killing him in an instant. Now, we're not going to get into all the theories about who really killed JFK.
Why
But most
not?
believe the main dude responsible was Lee Harvey Oswald,
Almost certainly the main dude responsible was Lee Harvey Oswald. I don't think there's really any doubt that that's true. All the conspiracy theories aside, the one thing I can get behind is were others involved. That, I think, is an open question, but whether he was involved or not, I don't think is. He definitely was there. He definitely pulled a trigger. We can argue about whether he acted alone or if he had support or if he was egged on into it by others. We can have all those debates.
was murdered himself just 3 days later, making things even more suspicious. But
Oh,
before
yeah.
the assassination, Nellie Connolly was sitting in the middle row when she told JFK, "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you." And JFK responded, "No, you certainly can't." Just
Ironic.
seconds before he was shot. At just 46 years old, Kennedy was the youngest president ever killed in American history. And the man that took his place was Lyndon B. Johnson, who died 10 years later when he had a massive heart attack at his Texas ranch. And as he felt it come on, he grabbed the telephone and said, "Send Mike immediately," referring to his Secret Service agent. But it was too late. Those were his final words as he dropped dead. Now, Richard Nixon died in a similar fashion. Famous for dealing with Watergate and getting impeached, dude lived a pretty stressful life. But Nixon didn't die until he was 82. After suffering a massive stroke in his home in New Jersey, Nixon yelled, "Help!" That was his last word as he was rushed to the hospital and slipped into a coma before finally passing. But I wonder if that was more stressful than the time he resigned from being the president.
Right.
Because the next man up was Gerald Ford, who served out the rest of his term. And thanks to modern medicine, Gerald Ford lived to the ripe age of 93 years old when he
Yeah.
died from cerebrovascular disease.
Yeah, I don't know if a lot of people realize this, but Ford was an athlete when he was younger. He was in pretty good shape.
Which is a fancy way of saying blood couldn't flow to his brain. He also struggled with arteriosclerosis, which is hardening of the arteries. All of this led to the peaceful passing of Gerald Ford in his California home, where he set the new record for the longest living president in U.S. history. But no last words were made public. His family wanted to
His
keep things
successor
private.
gonna break
But
that
Ford's
record, though.
record didn't last very long,
Right.
because the next president, Jimmy Carter, seemed to live forever. In
Yep.
fact, he literally just died. Jimmy Carter lived to be 100 years old before dying of natural causes on December 29th, 2024.
Yep.
Although his actual moment of death last words weren't publicly reported, in the final weeks, Carter told his family that he was ready to see Rosalind again, referring to his wife who had died a month earlier. It's pretty crazy to see a president reach the century mark. And Ronald Reagan wasn't too far behind, dying at 93 years old after a decade-long battle with Alzheimer's. And since he had Alzheimer's, Reagan had no lucid final words before he died.
Right. Alzheimer's is horrible. If you've not had experience with it, consider yourself lucky. I spent a year and a half unemployed taking care of my grandmother who had advanced Alzheimer's. My family paid me to just be a living caretaker. And it was just such a frustrating and miserable experience. Watching somebody's mind just get eaten away, memories vanish, random personality changes, you name it, hallucinations. The further it went, the worse it got. And, by the end, I was having trouble feeding her. She couldn't go to the restroom on her own. She would throw temper tantrums if I tried to feed her. I tried to give her water. He would attack the food, throw it away, called the police on me multiple times, claiming that I was a burglar breaking in. And one time she called the police and told him I was a murderer. That one was actually kind of funny because she called 911. She told the police somebody had broken in and was trying to kill her. And when they asked her for a description, She said, I don't know. Here, he can tell you. She hands the phone to me. And I'm telling the police, I'm describing myself. No, I'm not trying to murder her, I promise. And the police actually came up and talked to me and said, she's been calling a lot lately. This can't continue. You've got to do something. So we ended up having to take steps to make sure she couldn't call 911. It was just, by the end of it, I was going crazy, quite literally. It was that bad. I couldn't wish the experience on anybody. And one of my great personal fears is getting Alzheimer's myself because of that. It does run in my family, but so far, knock on wood, it's always affected only the female line. So here's hoping. That experience really terrified me. So if you've experienced this with somebody in your life, you have my deepest sympathies. If you haven't, I hope it never happens to you. It's horrible.
Man, I hate that disease. Kind of like I hate Parkinson's, which is what George H.W. Bush suffered from in his final years, which left him
one of my dad's uncles died from that.
His last phone call was to his son, the other President George Bush, where he said his final words, "I love you too," right before dying at 94 years old. But that takes us to today, where 5 presidents remain. And although it's the most dangerous job in the world, modern-day presidents live longer than ever before. Shout out to the Secret Service and top-notch medical care. Because the average lifespan of presidents went from 70 years old in the 18th and 19th centuries up to 78 years old in the 20th century. In fact, we have an old guy in office now, and he had to dodge a couple bullets to get there. But if you think that's crazy, I'll leave you with the most insane presidential death facts. 8 presidents died while in office, 4 were assassinated, and 4 died from natural causes. The youngest president died at 46, while the oldest president died at 100. Remarkably, Adams and Jefferson died on the exact same day. And don't get me started on the insane coincidences between Lincoln and JFK's assassinations.
Oh, no.
But I guess we'll save that for another video.
All right. And one thing that I kind of found interesting is there were a lot of long-lived presidents early on. Jefferson and Adams come to mind. And then through the 19th century, you get a lot of shorter-lived ones. And then back into the 20th century, they start growing again. It's almost like the 19th century was just nightmarish. And by 19th century, I'm not counting the first decade or so, because that's when, a couple decades, because that's when you have Washington, or not Washington, but Jefferson and Adams and those guys. But they did pretty good. But then there's this period where it's kind of getting lower and lower, and then it starts going up again. Interesting stuff. I knew how most of them died. I wasn't able to contribute a lot because there's really not a lot you can contribute to this that's directly related to their deaths. But I hope I was able to add at least a little. Nothing else, I had a couple personal stories I could share. So I hope you liked the video. That's one more request off the list, about 100 more to go. Actually, I don't have that many requests. I've only got about half a dozen left. So the channel's growing every day. I'm still at a stage where I can probably get to every request that's made. So if you've got a request of a video you'd like me to cover, please get it to me now, because it's not going to be that much longer before I have to start doing polls and things like that for requests, because we're getting closer to where we're getting too many people for me to reasonably be able to keep up with requests. But for now, the doors are open. If you got something you want to see, just drop it in the comments. I'd be more than happy to take a look at it, assuming not something I've already covered on the channel. So with that said, thank you for joining me. See you next time. Bye-bye.